Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf, and as promised, I am bringing you the Geneva Bible, chapter 34. I hope you're having a wonderful, restful, peaceful, fantastic 4th of July holiday, long weekend. I hope it was everything you wanted it to be and continues to be. Hope you had a chance to appreciate the incredible blessings of this country and all the people who fought to protect them. And I think it's germane to what we're doing here with the Geneva Bible because this is the story of freedom and free will and humans engaging with freedom. So, as you recall, if you were with me a few days ago when I read chapter 33 in Exodus, God is very upset with the children of Israel because he gave Moses the Ten Commandments, and Moses came down to give them to the children of Israel, only to find that they had melted down their earrings, their jewelry, at his brother's instruction, upsettingly enough to Moses, his brother Aaron the priest, and they had created a calf, sculpture, statue, and they were worshiping it as an idol, the way they'd seen other tribes worship animals or worship graven images. And this horrified God broke his heart, very disappointed, very upset. Um, there was a massacre, and the people who said affirmatively, I want to go with God, I want to be part of God's army, um, continued their journey to the promised land, and the people who bailed on God essentially were destroyed. And there's no sort of nice way around that, but it's important for us to notice that people do kind of get wiped out on this journey. It's a very serious journey. It's very serious what God is asking of the people with whom he's in this intimate relationship. And he, he they're his creations, and he did tell his army essentially to wipe out the people who did not want to stand with him, did not want to align with his request, his covenant, and so they are dead. So now we have only the people who affirmatively said, yes, I want to go ahead with this story with the Lord. I want to know what the commandments are. I want to be in this relationship with God. Only they have survived to try again, essentially. So now I titled this God Tries Again, because now we're going to have a redo, a do-over of the Ten Commandments. It's like, it's one of those moments as a literary scholar where I really do think something happened here, right? That there's, whether it's literally true or not, there's at least the kernel of an accurate story that really unfolded in this sacred text, because dramatically it's not great to have to do it again. Right, it's not the most gripping storytelling, and it's kind of depressing that the first time around Moses was so angry he broke the tablets on which God himself with his finger had written the Ten Commandments. And so Moses has to go back up the mountain again, leave everyone behind again, hope for the best again, hope they don't mess up this time, basically ask God, say to God, I'm really sorry. They really blew it. Please give us another chance. Give me another chance. And please rewrite those tablets that you have already written. I mean, honestly, when you're at work and someone inadvertently deletes your file, you're not thrilled about having to recreate the file that you've already created. So for that kind of the the verisimilitude, which is a word I've explained before, if you're not familiar with it, the true soundingness of the fact that Moses was so upset that he broke God's tablets and had to go back to God to do it all over again. It's not the kind of thing a fantastic storyteller making it all up would put in there, because it's not great drama. It has the ring of a, like I mean, why I'm so impressed with Exodus is that think about everything we've been through. People keep bungling it all in different ways. And that is human nature. That's human life. That's the human story. People get distracted. They run out of patience. They get angry. They're thirsty. They're hungry. They're irritable. They don't follow directions. And because many cultures have origin stories in which the people appear as heroic and receive, perfect instruction from the gods, right? This is not that kind of story. People, even the most elevated, even Moses is flawed. He killed someone. He was so upset, right? And he's a stammerer and he lacks self-confidence. So, and the people, as I mentioned, keep kind of blowing it and being unable to kind of move ahead the way God hopes they will with this narrative to bring them in alignment with Him into the promised land. They keep botching it. And for like literally for these reasons, this has the ring of truth to me. There's a book by a theologian named Bart Ehrman called How Jesus Became God that I've been reading, and I'll go into more detail about that another time. It's not really relevant to the reading of the Geneva Bible just now because it's, of course, about the New Testament. But he actually describes a word, which I will retrieve and present to you, which describes the fact that theologians and historians, well, certainly historians of the early church and of the life of Jesus, tend to credit um, as more likely to have really happened stories or details that are the opposite of what the authors would want you to hear or know or think, that in some way don't reflect particularly well on the people at the heart of the story, or that are contradictory to the message that the authors want to give, want to communicate, or, contrary to their goal. If the goal is converting people, for instance, with the New Testament to following Jesus, historians of the Gospels give kind of extra points to those stories or episodes which are contrary to what a storyteller trying to establish a religion basically would want to include in the story. So for that reason, historians of the Gospels believe, for the most part, that Jesus really was crucified by the Romans, because who would want to include that in their story of the Messiah? Um, because if you're really the Messiah, you don't get crucified, right? You don't go down in defeat in an ignominious death. But Yeshua did. So for that reason, that it's not the kind of thing that someone, inventing a story for the goal of starting a religion would include. Historians of the early church think it probably did happen, think it's probably historically true. By the same token, all this fumbling about and crossed wires and disappointment in this story of God just trying to get a people to be in alignment with Him, right? Pretty simple. It's not the kind of thing you'd include unless something like it really happened. That's my view, anyway. So let's go ahead and start reading the Geneva Bible. And it's so lovely that we've already got over 1,600 people tuning in on a beautiful sunny day. So I think all of us, not all of us, many of us are feeling that desire to kind of go back to the sources and get some strength and some wisdom and insight from these sacred texts in such a horrible, evil, chaotic time that we happen to live in. All right, chapter 34. And so you remember that at the end of chapter 33, God revealed Himself to Moshe and basically, so sweet, covered Moshe's face with His hand so that Moshe wouldn't be overwhelmed with the physical image of God, and allowed Moshe to see God kind of from a distance departing. So in this part of the story, or this manifestation, God has a being, right? God has, I wouldn't say God has a body, but it is actually narrated as if God has a hand, God has a front of his body, God has a back of his body. So I don't want to dwell on that, because I don't take it literally, because God is also in a burning bush, and God is, in a cloud, and God is whatever God wants to be. But I think it's really interesting, because earlier in Genesis, you remember Yahweh saying, let us create man in our image, in the image, and that humans were created in the image and likeness of God. So here God is manifesting in the last chapter to Moshe as like as a human form, which is also the form of God. So, glorious, magnificent, unimaginable, all of that, not even viewable face to face, because it's so overwhelming, but in some way human like, right? With, for instance, a hand. So either God is being polite and doing that so as not to freak out Moshe, who is a human, or there is something of a family resemblance between humans and God. Maybe we are special to God. Maybe we were created in some way in God's image and likeness. I mean, he doesn't appear as a badger, or as a, giant, bull, or some other, a triangle. I mean, it's a human God talking to a human family that he's trying to have a relationship with, and that is our story. All right, chapter 34, and the sub headline in the Geneva Bible, the Founders Bible, the Puritans Bible, Shakespeare's Bible, Anna Hutchinson's Bible, it says the tables are renewed, meaning made new again, recreated. The description of God, all fellowship with idolaters is forbidden. The three feasts, Moses is 40 days in the mount. His face shines, and he covers it with a veil. And so here we go. And the Lord said unto Moses, hew you. Hew is to chop out of wood, or to chop out of stone. Hew you 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon the tables, meaning the tablets, the words that were in the first tables, which you broke in pieces. And be ready in the morning, that you may come up early unto the mount of Sinai. Very interesting, because earlier it was referred to as Mount Horeb, and now it's being called Sinai. And it's the same mountain geographically, but it's being renamed by God here. And wait there for me in the top of the mount. But let no man come up with you, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the sheep nor cattle feed before this mount. Like, don't let the sheep or cattle, which are such a big part of life in the desert, graze on the mountain. Clear everyone away. Then Moses hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and rose up early in the morning, and went up the mount of Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tables of stone. And the Lord descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. So the Lord passed before his face, and cried, the Lord, strong, merciful, and gracious, slow to anger, and abundant in goodness and truth, reserving mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and not making the wicked innocent, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children unto the 3rd and 4th generation. And the note says, this ought to be referred to the Lord and not to Moses, proclaiming. And that's very interesting, because it is a little confusing. Who is saying the Lord, the Lord? And it is God. God is naming himself, naming his qualities, kind of introducing himself face to face, and describing who he is, what his qualities are. Then Moshe made haste and bowed himself to the earth and worshipped, and said, O Lord, I pray you, If I have found grace in your sight, that the Lord would now go with us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. And the note says, seeing the people are something I can't read, of nature, and the rulers have need to call upon God, that he would always be present with his spirit. I wish I could read that, but I can't. And said, O Lord, and said, O Lord, I pray you, if I have found grace in your sight, that the Lord would now go with us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity, our sin, and take us for your inheritance. And he answered, God answered, behold, I will make a covenant before all your people, and will do marvels such as have not been done in all the world, neither in all nations. And all the people among who you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with you. And we're going to look at the Hebrew for that word, but terrible probably doesn't mean awful, catastrophic. It probably is the Hebrew norah, which means full of awe, full of amazingness, something that is overwhelming. Okay, we'll see. Keep diligently that which I command you this day. Behold, I will cast out before you the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Take heed to yourself that you make no compact, no agreement with the inhabitants of the land where you go, lest they be the cause of ruin among you. But you shall overthrow their altars and break their images in pieces and cut down their groves, meaning their sacred groves. And the note says, if you follow their wickedness and pollute yourself with their idolatries. And the note also says, which fast places, which pleasant places they chose for their idols, meaning those are the groves that will be cut down, pleasant places chosen for their idols. For you shall bow down to none other God, because the Lord, whose name is a jealous God. Lest you make a compact with the inhabitants of the land, and when they go a whoring after their gods and do sacrifice unto their gods, some man call you, and you eat of his sacrifice. And lest you take of their daughters unto your sons, and their daughters go a whoring after their gods, and make your sons go a whoring after their gods. I mean, these are strong words. He's not, God is not making it ambiguous what he wants and doesn't want here. You shall make no gods of metal. And the note says, as gold, silver, brass, or anything that is molten. The feast of unleavened bread shall you keep. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, in the time of the month of Aviv, which is springtime. For in the month of Aviv you came out of Egypt. Every male that first opens the womb shall be mine. Also all the firstborn of your flocks shall be reckoned mine, both of ewes and sheep. And ewes, we think, is like ewes, female sheep. But the firstborn, meaning of the ass, the donkey, you shall buy out with a lamb. And if you redeem him not, then you shall break his neck. All the firstborn of your sons shall you redeem, and none shall appear before me empty. So he's saying, this is how I need you to sacrifice to me, and your sons should also sacrifice to me. And the note says, without offering something. 6 days you shall work, and in the 7th day you shall rest. Both in earing time and in the harvest you shall rest. And that means like planting and harvesting. You shall also observe the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, in the time of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Gathering Fruits in the end of the year. And these holidays are still celebrated by Orthodox Jews. Thrice in a year shall all your men children appear before the Lord Jehovah, God of Israel. And the note says, which was in September when the sun declined, which in the count of political things called the end of the year. But to this day, we do that. September is still the start of the year in the Jewish calendar, and we begin again. Rosh Hashanah is in September. Isn't that amazing? And Rosh Hashanah means head of the year, the new year. For I will cast out the nations before you and enlarge your coasts, so that no man shall desire your land when you shall come up to appear before the Lord your God thrice in the year. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, neither shall aught, any of the sacrifice in the feast of Passover, be left unto the morning. The first ripe fruits of your land you shall bring unto the house of the Lord your God. Yet shall you not boil a kid in his mother's milk. And we've run into this before. This is the first, among the first kashrut, kosher laws that you don't, we've talked about this, you don't want, but God is repeating it. It's really important to God. Very interesting. You don't want to be a barbarian who boils a lamb or a goat in this case, a goat in the milk of its mother, because that's barbaric, because the goat mom has feelings too. The baby who's dead has feelings too. The goat mom doesn't want to see her baby, prepared, cooked in milk that she produced in order to nurture her living baby. It's very moving, but it's important because this is a repetition. Second or third time God has said this. And the Lord said unto Moses, write you these words, for after the tenor of these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel, meaning along the lines of what I'm saying, I've made a covenant. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, and did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote in the tables the words of the covenant, even the 10 commandments. And the note says, this miracle was to confirm the authority of the law and ought no more to be followed than other miracles. I have no idea why they said that, because you should follow this miracle, but I'll keep going. So when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, oh, I know why they said it, because in the 16th century, by now, Christianity has been well established for many centuries. And the prevailing view of the people who codified Christianity from the 4th century on is that you don't need the law of the Old Testament because Jesus has arrived for Gentiles, for non-Jews. So it's interesting that they make that note, because these are a set of directions that God is giving very clearly that that the children of Israel are supposed to follow. Of course, Jesus hasn't appeared yet, so those debates haven't happened yet. But God is being clear with the children of Israel. So when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, the 2 tables of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he descended from the mount. Now, Moses knew not that the skin of his face, and it's wist not, which is 16th century for knew not, that the skin of his face shone bright after that God had talked with him. And Aaron and all the children of Israel looked upon Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone bright, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called them, and Aaron and all the chief of the congregation returned unto him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward, all the children of Israel came near, and he, Moshe, charged them with all that the Lord had said unto him in Mount Sinai. So Moses made an end of communing with them and had put a covering upon his face. But when Moses came before the Lord to speak with him, he took off the covering until he came out. Then he came out and spoke unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the note says, which was in the tabernacle of the congregation. So Moses didn't just come down a second time with the tablets, this copy in his hand, as opposed to the first copy, which you recall was actually in God's hand. God had written the first version. But Moses' face was shining so much from presumably being exposed face to face with God, that people were scared to go near him, even though he was unaware of this. Really interesting. But this is, you see one of these kind of adjustments that God and Moses and the children of Israel make as they get used to interacting directly with God, which is Moses realized that the people couldn't take the radiance of God that was kind of reflected in Moses's face after Moses spoke with God. And so Moses would put on a face covering, a veil, is one translation here, in order to speak with people and communicate what God was saying to him. And then he would take it off when he was hanging out with God because he didn't need it. Um, but the note is reminding us that he didn't go all the way back up the mountain to keep chatting with God and checking in with God. He could just go into the tabernacle of meeting, which was still among the people, which had survived. Um, and that's the end of the chapter. So let's go now to the Revised Standard Version. It's this, interestingly, this chapter is pretty accurately translated, except for a couple of tendentious translations. So one of the things I want to call your attention to is line 6. Again, as I always say, no disrespect to the, to the modern Catholic Church or to translators of this version. Who know? I don't know why some of these translations are the way they are. If you're following this series, that I very much am aware that where there are changes in the translation, it tends to make God meaner and make humans more pathetic and more in need of a middleman or a priest or absolution, or it dials down the sweetness of the relationship that is innate, and the familial quality of the relationship between God and humans in the original. So one example of this kind of escalating, I need to find a good term for it because it's so consistent, the kind of escalation of God's meanness, which really isn't there in the original, is line 7. Let's take a look. So in line 7 in the Geneva Bible, and it's a strong passage. I mean, it's intense, right? God is saying, this is who I am. And it's not like I'm a fluffy Easter bunny, or all you have to do is, believe in me and I'll just wipe out all your sin and you don't have to do anything. It's not that message at all. And I really think that, I mean, we don't really have to go down rabbit holes, but Jews are consistently being oppressed or killed or tortured around the world, and we don't need to get into kind of modern political conflicts. This has happened for 2,000 years. There could be many reasons historically for that, but I do think one reason is that they have the most annoying religion in the sense that, and I say that with appreciation, or we have an annoying religion in that we were the kind of entry point in history for God saying, this is my set of requirements, really, for a relationship with you, for your well-being, for your health and your peace, and your having many children that all live, and your fields to be fruitful. I need you to do these moral things. And people just don't want to do those moral things. They just don't want to hear that. And many, many, many religions, you don't have to do those things, right, to get the gods to smile at you. I mean, in the Greco-Roman empires, which are, thousands of years in the future, all you have to do is sacrifice, or, have sex with a Vestal virgin, or, give money to the priest or the oracle, or pour wine, or worship the statue of the emperor. I mean, so easy, right, compared with this kind of God with this kind of direction. And even in this contemporary period, the Egyptians worship a cat, whatever, worship a cat, worship, a mummy. It's not a big deal. And all the all the tribes that are surrounding the children of Israel in their journey through the desert worship objects made of metal, worship objects made of wood. God has mentioned here their sacred groves. They worship trees. They worship piles of stones. They're sacrificing their kids. Maybe they didn't find that easy, but we can't imagine what human beings were like then, or if they even let themselves bond with their children when children were sold into slavery, died before the age of 5, were trafficked. I mean, who knows, right? It was such a different world, but they definitely sacrificed their children, and the intervention of Yahweh. We saw this with the story of Abraham and Isaac. The great intervention is no, don't sacrifice your kids anymore. You're not going to sacrifice your children. You're going to sacrifice animals instead. Huge leap forward, right? But all around these people, there are fertility cults. People are having crazy, sexual orgies, potentially. They're worshiping the stars. They're worshiping cows. They're worshiping, as I mentioned, trees. They're just, it may be easier to sacrifice even something you love than to live a moral life day after day after day after day. Not by modern sensibilities, not by how people feel about their children in the human record. But this is very early, and people sacrifice their kids. We know it. It's just an historical fact. How did they feel when they did it? I have no idea, but they didn't stop, right? Until this kind of thing intervened in history. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is a big deal because this is a different kind of God. This is a different kind of relationship with God. And it doesn't surprise me that people who keep, century after century after century saying, you can't just say the words, you actually have to do the things, you have to do the moral things. They are annoying, right? They're like very annoying. So that's just interesting. And so God is saying clearly in line 7 who he is in this regard. He's not saying I'm, Ra, and you have to, give me a third of your orchard. He's saying this is who I am. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. Such an interesting phrase. So the Lord passed before his face and cried, the Lord, like, here I am the Lord, strong, merciful, and gracious, slow to anger, and abundant in goodness and truth, reserving mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and not making the wicked innocent, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children unto the 3rd and 4th generation. That's the Geneva Bible. And that's intense, right? Like you can see why the children of Israel are like, that's a lot. We'll just build, we'll just make this little calf over here and worship the calf because that's a lot, right? Do we really want to get involved with that? It's a big ask, as they say. So, but he's nicer in the Geneva Bible than in the Revised Standard Version, even with that stern introduction. Let's take a look. Okay, this is Revised Standard Version. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God, merciful and gracious. Does he say that? 7. The Lord. No, they insert a God. A God. Like there's more than one? No, this is badly mistranslated. The Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands. That's not what it says. In the Revised Standard Version, it says, the Lord, reserving mercy for thousands, right? And this is keeping steadfast love for thousands, but it's active mercy in the original. Forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. So the Revised Standard Version definitely adds a God as opposed to God, um, which kind of dials down the godness of God. Certainly, it's not a Jewish view, right? It's not an Old Testament view that this is a God among other gods. Um, and they substitute steadfast love for mercy, and they intensify the um, accountability of the wicked. They say, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. And um, the Revised Standard Version says, and not making the wicked innocent. So what the Revised Standard Version says is there's justice. And I'm sorry, what the Geneva Bible says is there's justice. I'm not going to call black white. I'm not going to call evil good. This is God talking. There is accountability. You can't just be evil and expect nothing to happen that is bad, and not just to yourself, but to your descendants. So, given the way God's personality has manifested in the Hebrew and in the Geneva Bible, I don't read this as I'm just going to punish not just you, but your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids, totally innocent descendants, right? I don't read it that way. I read this, and this aligns with other times God has tried to say, you live in a moral universe. These are the kind of driving directions of being a human in a moral universe. I read this as God saying, you can't just be an evil person and expect that nothing will happen, right? There is justice. It is a moral universe. There is accountability. What you do matters, and it isn't just about making your own life less auspicious. Uh, it's going to affect your descendants as well, because that's how serious evilness is. It creates less than optimal situations for your descendants when you choose evil. And God has been very clear about this equation all the way back to Abraham, when he's saying, if you behave in a righteous way, it blesses your descendants, right? It creates optimal conditions, even for future generations that you will never live to see. And so I don't like to use the word karma lightly, because that's a totally different religious tradition. But I read this as God really saying, your decisions really matter. You know, your moral decisions matter, and you can choose to either bless your descendants by being a righteous person. It's going to spill over into the circumstances that they inherit when they're born, or it's not going to stop with you because it's so serious. It's going to spill over, and they will have to work even harder to escape the ripples of what you've done. So I don't read that as punitive, but it's certainly more punitive in the Revised Standard Version than in the Geneva Bible. And then the other thing I want to call your attention to is line 24. Very interesting. We'll see what the Hebrew says in a minute. But line 24 is in the Geneva Bible, for I will cast out the nations before you and enlarge your coasts, so that no man will desire your land. And in the Revised Standard Version, this is another edit, and we've seen several of them, in which the borders of the Holy Land as a belonging of the children of Israel are inaccurately expanded. Remember, we saw this with the Revised Standard Version just put the Euphrates in there where it wasn't, expanding the borders, right, of the Holy Land as a belonging of the children of Israel. And the Euphrates just wasn't in the original. It was a shocking addition. But it moved the borders kind of east than they were in the original. And here the translation is not, I will cast out nations before you and enlarge your coasts. They translate it in the Revised Standard Version as enlarge your borders. So it is a question of how do you enlarge coasts? And we'll see what the word is in Hebrew, but it's change. And so everything else is pretty accurate except line 32. The Geneva Bible says, and afterward all the children of Israel came near, and he charged them with all that the Lord had said unto him in Mount Sinai. And in the Revised Standard Version, and afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And it's a, subtle difference, but again, it's more theological in the Revised Standard Version than it is in the Geneva Bible, in which it's very conversational. God says, do these things, please, if you want to be my people, to Moses. Moses brings, kind of takes notes on the tablets, brings the information to the children of Israel. They go into a tent, the children of Israel, as you recall, don't hang out with God, but they're pretty close to him. And Moses hangs out with God and charges the children of Israel with God's information. A charge is like, this is your responsibility. A commandment is like, you have no free will. I'm commanding you. I'm in charge of you. I'm your master. You're my slave. I'm commanding you to do this. And that's not what it is in the Revised Standard Version. So let's take a quick look now in our last few moments at the Chabad. Oh, do I not have Chabad? Let's take a look. Exodus 34. What does the Hebrew say? And remember, it's Shemot, which means names. And let's take a look at line 7, that powerful introduction. All right. Okay. Vaya'avor Adonai. This is line 6. Vaya'avor Adonai, and passed over God, al panav, on his face, meaning Moses' face. Vayikra Adonai, and God called Adonai el rachum v'chanun. God, it doesn't say a God, it doesn't say the God, it says God. El rachum v'chanun, a God, different word for God is El rachum, merciful, v'chanun, and compassionate, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, slow to anger and abundant in chesed is loving kindness and truth. And this is to this day, this sentence is a beautiful hymn or song in Jewish ceremonies. Adonai, Adonai, Erachum v'chanun, Erech apayim rav chesed v'tzedek. V'rav chesed ve'emet. And it's this kind of sequence of names comes up again. So he's saying, I'm a benevolent God, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness and truth. Now let's see line 7, the tough sentences. Notzer chesed le'alafim, notzer chesed le'alafim, noseon ve'pesha v'chet. Notzer chesed le'alafim, preserving loving kindness. Also mercy, you can translate chesed as mercy. Chasidim, which you've probably heard of, Orthodox Jews, that's the same root, right? They are full of loving kindness or mercy, according to their name for their sect. Notzer chesed la'alafim, to thousands. Noseon v'pesha, forgiving iniquity and rebellion, v'chet, and sin. And ve'nake lo yenake poked. Yet he does not completely clear of sin, right? Very gentle. On avot albanim poked, he visits, and you've seen this verb mefaked. It's like a responsibility or duty. Poked on, he visits sin. Avot al banim, fathers on children. Ve'al bnei banim, al shlashim ve'al revaim. It's interesting. It's translated, pardon me, I have to plug this in. It's translated always very scarily to the third and fourth generation. But in the Hebrew, it just says to the third ones and the fourth ones. So it's not that clear that it's third and fourth generations. And then let's take a look at the next section that raised questions. So can you hear the difference? It's much gentler. It's the Geneva Bible is gentler than the Revised Standard Version, and the Hebrew is gentler even than the Geneva Bible. Now, I mentioned line 10. God is saying, it is a terrible thing that I will do with you. Let's see what it is in Hebrew. Vayomar, and he said, meaning God, Hine anochi koret brit. Here I am koret, creating a brit is a covenant. You've heard of a brit milah or bris. It's a covenant when the baby is circumcised, but it can mean a covenant in any context. Neged kol amcha, against neged kol amcha, against all of your people. Aseh, meaning before all of your people. Aseh niflaot, I will make wonders. Asher lo nivreu, that were not created. B'chol haaretz u'b'chol hagoyim, in all of the land and in all of the nations. Remember, goyim means nations. V'ra'a kol ha'am, and all the people will see. Asher ata b'kirbo et ma'aseh, that asher ata, that they are in the presence, that they are near the work of God, Adonai, ki norahu, I knew it, ki norahu asher ani oseh imcha. I knew it would be norah, because the work of the Lord, how awe-inspiring it is that I will perform with you. So in the Hebrew, God is literally saying, I'm going to, he's explaining the role of the children of Israel, which we've talked about. It's a model, an exemplary nation, not just for the children of Israel, but to demonstrate. It's like a cooking demo. If you put these ingredients together, you'll get this. He wants to show the world, in the presence of all your people, I will make distinctions such as have not been created upon all the earth and among all the nations, and all the people in whose midst you are shall see the work of the Lord, how awe-inspiring it is that I will perform with you. So he's saying, I'm going to, create miracles, and it's going to be awe-inspiring, and everyone will see that if you're in relationship with the true God, amazing things happen. That's what it says in the Hebrew. It's not, it's a terrible thing I will do with you. Oh my gosh. And boy, if you read just the Revised Standard Version, you'll think God is wanting to do a terrible thing, but it's an awe-inspiring thing that he wants to do. All right. Let's see. Let's see what enlarge your coasts is in the Hebrew, line 24. When I drive out nations from before you, ki orish goyim, and there's that word goyim again, which is nations, because I will drive out nations mepanecha, from your face. You remember that, meaning from before you. Vehirchavti, and rachov means a street. Lerachev is to widen. Rachav is wide. Hirchavti, I will widen. Et gvulecha, your border. It is border. It's not coast. Velo yachmod ish, and a man won't covet et artzecha, your lands. Be'altecha lirot et pnei, when you go up to see the face of God, Adonai, Elohecha, shlosh pa'amim beshana. When you go up to see the face of God, it's translated appear before the Lord here, but it's actually when you see the face of God. So again, he's saying, people can see my face. You come up and sacrifice before me, eventually in Jerusalem, and 3 times a year you can see me. Shalosh pamim b'shana. So he's saying, eventually, when you're in the Holy Land, you will be safe coming up to the temple to sacrifice to me 3 times a year, which is what eventually happened when they did have the land of Israel and they did build a temple. People did go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year. And then let's go to the very end, line 32, and see what he did. Ve'achrechen nigshu kol bnei Israel, and after this approached close, neared, like a verb, all the children of Israel, Vayetzum et kol asher diber. And he would instruct, direct, command them. It's a fair translation. Everything that he, kol asher diber Adonai ito behar Sinai, everything that spoke to him God, that God said to him, with him in the mountain of Sinai. And then I want to see what radiant is in line 35. At the very end, it says, V'ra'u b'nei Israel, and they saw, the children of Israel, et pnei Moshe, the face of God, of Moshe, sorry. And just notice how many times people are talking about panim, pnei, panaim. It means in front of the face of, but there's a lot of face-to-faceness, right? And now Moses' literal face is glowing or radiant. And so there is this sense of intimacy, that things are happening face-to-face directly. There are no intermediaries. Et pnei Moshe, the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, ki karan or, because it was radiating rays of light. Oh, is light. Pnei Moshe, the face of Moses. Veheshiv Moshe et hamasveh, and Moses replaced the face covering al panav, on his face, ad bo'o, until he came ledaber ito, until he would come again to speak with him. So it's more than, wow, I'm so glad we read that. It's more than that the skin of Moses's face had become radiant. It's literally ki karan or panei Moshe. Their keren is like a rays of light, and he's saying his face. You've seen pictures of saints with halos, right? They're saying there were rays of light coming out of the face of Moses. It's more than radiant. And I just want to add one tiny final thing about this, that Michelangelo's Moses, I think it's Michelangelo, has horns, right? And from this descended the folk belief that Jews had horns. And I remember as a child, believe it or not, I would meet kids in school who I was their first Jewish child, and they would say, "Show me your horns," because they had heard that Jews had horns. Not cute, not adorable, kind of disturbing. But this comes from this word keren, because karnaim means horns, but it also means, keren means ray of light. Like Keren Kayemet is the name of a charity, which is like a ray of light that it endures, an enduring ray of light. So through that mistranslation or confusion, it was translated that Moshe, in some translation, I don't see it here, Moshe had horns as opposed to rays of light. And let's see what you've all been very patient. We have a few minutes left for some questions or comments. And thank you for joining me. My goodness, we have over 4,000 people. That's so nice. Mario Tinajero says, I didn't know Moses asked God for a reprint. That's such a great way to put it. That's literally kind of what happened. The other thing I really want you to notice is this says that Moshe brought the 10 Commandments through this second engraving of the tablets to the children of Israel, but you don't get the 10 Commandments here. It's almost like meta commandments have been lifted out. I think we're going to get to the 10 Commandments, but right now, God is kind of lifting out the things that are most important to him. And he's not saying, interestingly to me, the most important thing is don't commit adultery. The most important thing is don't commit murder. It's so interesting what he says the most important things are. The most important things are involved maintaining a relationship with God, keeping the Sabbath, right? Resting, a day where you're not distracted, where you can think about being in relationship with God, making your life holy. We talked about the holy-ifying, Mekadesh, which is Shabbat and, blessing the candles, blessing the bread, all the things we do in Judaism to make things holy, right? And he's also saying he's giving people holidays, literally holy days in which people can bring their sacrifices to God. So the meta instructions, some of which do not appear in the Ten Commandments, right? Like Shavuot, um, these festivals are not in the Ten Commandments. They're in Scripture, right? God just said them, but they're not part of the Ten Commandments. You will observe the first fruits. You will, bring your first harvest to me. The Feast of the Tabernacles is what that's called, Sukkot. They're not in the Ten Commandments. So God is kind of giving a reader's guide or an introduction almost to the Ten Commandments, in which he's not even lifting out the most important of the commandments, but he's saying the most important thing is to stay in connection with me. And you almost feel like, if you like, and also don't commit idolatry. So it's almost like, if you stay in connection with God, that's the most important thing. You're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna fall short. Hopefully you don't murder anyone, but you're going to covet, you're gonna, want your neighbor's donkey, or maidservant or whatever. You're human, you're gonna mess up. But the most important thing is to stay in relationship with God. That if you stay in relationship with God, between the two of you, you can handle all the really bad mistakes you're going to make, right? I mean, Moses killed someone. Moses was a murderer, right? But God, is clearly not holding it against him. I mean, I'm sure it's not great. And Moses, as you'll see, never got to enter the Holy Land. But um, those even very mortal mistakes, transgressions, are not what God is foregrounding. All the things God is foregrounding here have to do with maintaining a relationship with God. All right. So, what are some comments? And then it's like the Ten Commandments are literally, stop at the red light, turn left when it turns green, right? How you maintain a decent life so that you can stay in connection with God. But the most important thing is staying in connection with God and not being cruel. Like, literally, don't seethe a kid in its mother's milk is up there with, come to the temple, sacrifice to me. Don't, be an idolater, maintain a primary faithful relationship with me. I'm not sure why that instruction not to be cruel to animals, really, and not to be a barbarian is way up there at the top. It is definitely, as I've said before, making me rethink my inclination toward cheeseburgers, right? Because there's something very serious there that God is trying to say. Maybe it's I keep wanting a metaphor that will allow me to keep eating bacon, and maybe there really isn't one, but if it's a metaphor, the metaphor is, don't be a barbarian, right? Don't be an animal. Don't treat animals as if they have no feelings, right? Don't be don't be a pig, right? Don't eat everything just because you're hungry. Like, have some self-respect, have some respect for the animals that give their lives to feed you. That's my best interpretation, short of just literally God wants us to keep kosher, which maybe he does, in which case I've got to get a grip. But let's see. But the point is, those are the main things that God surfaced. Stay close to me. Don't betray me. Don't, like, abandon your relationship with me to go whoring after other gods. I mean, it's like strong language. It's watered down to play the harlot after other gods here, but it's like, don't go whoring after other gods. I'm dying to know what it is in the Hebrew. Let's see. Just give me 30 seconds to see what he says about whoring after other gods. Oh, go a whoring after their gods, line 16. Let's see what it is in the Hebrew. And then I promise I'll answer some more questions. And okay, lest you form a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Pen tichrot brit liyoshev haaretz vizano, and they, the Gentiles, achrei I knew it, and vizanu, and you go whoring, achrei Eloheihem, their gods, vizavchu, and they offer sacrifices, and lest you offer sacrifices, le'elohehem v'kara lecha, and they invite you, ve'achalta mizbecho, and you eat of their slaughtered sacrifices. I mean, which sounds pretty gross. Velakachta mibnotav, and lest, right? You take from their daughters, levanecha, for your sons, vizanu, and vizanu bnotav, and their daughters will go whoring. I mean, zona is a whore, a prostitute. Vizanu bnotav acharei Elohehen, and their daughters whore after their gods. Vehiznu et banecha, and your sons go whoring. This is the only time I've seen males able to go whoring. Acharei Elohehen, after their gods. He is pretty clear that you don't go whoring. It's like zona to this day means a prostitute. So it is prostitution to go after other gods, says the Lord. All right, last comments. This is really interesting, says Mario Tinahiro. I'm glad you think so. And he asks, so did the translators for the Catholic Church get the translation wrong? Well, again, Mario, welcome if you're joining us just now. But this is a theme I've tried to explain very gently all the way along, which is it's not just one sect or denomination got the translation wrong, although I will definitely stand my ground and say with all respect that there are flaws in this translation, in the Catholic modern translation. But the mistranslation, goes back hundreds of years and to many translations, really. And so that's why it's so important to go back to the original, I believe. And so I don't want to single out the Revised Standard Version, but all the translations do tend, of the Christian denominations, tend to err on the side of, these same themes of God being mistranslated as angry or mean or more irrational, more distant, the middleman more important, the priest more important, and human beings more pathetic, and less in relationship with God than the Hebrew and the Geneva Bible. And that's why I'm so interested in bringing you the Geneva Bible, because it is a very faithful translation from the Hebrew by people whose only, like, they were risking their lives, and some of them lost their lives just to get it right, for English audiences, English speaking audiences. Sandy Hardy says, this is fresh breath. Last week I realized King James had power and sway over the colonies through the King James Version Bible. You are exactly right. There is, this was a not authorized Bible. In fact, the Catholic queen at that time would martyr and did martyr some of the translators of this Bible. It was not authorized by the state, whereas the King James Version was authorized by King James, obviously. And so it's less radical. And that's another thing I keep saying with every reading. This is the Puritans' Bible. This is the Founders' Bible. This is Shakespeare's Bible. This is Anne Hutchinson's Bible, because this translation, like the Hebrew, would empower anyone to found a new nation in God's name, risk exile as a preacher, as a woman, to speak up about God, risk death, flee to Geneva, right? Risk martyrdom. I mean, it's so clear in the Geneva Bible that God helps people who stand with God, and empowers them. And later translations just don't have that relationship in that way be at the center of the story, right? Later translations are about the formation of religions and the establishment of religious hierarchies and religious rules. But the original would be very radical. It would be very destabilizing, because you can't rule colonists. right, it's not surprising that these people rebelled, right? And they're rebelling because God said, I'm going to, stand up to the greatest power on earth, which is Egypt at that time, and take you out with a mighty hand. If you follow me, I'll take care of you. I'll give you manna in the desert. And they're like, well, here we are in the desert. We're in the wilderness. We're going to throw in our lot with God and stand up to the greatest power on earth, which is the British Empire at that time. So it's not surprising. Uh, but there's a reason this is not an authorized version. The state doesn't want people to feel, like down to the handmaiden, right? Down to the female trafficked slave, Hagar. She's out in the desert. I always use this example. She's been kicked out by her jealous mistress, Sarah. She can't bear to watch her baby son die. They have no food, they have no water. God shows up for Hagar, the most, like, on that hierarchy of important people at that time, the trafficked female slave would be the lowest of the low. And God shows up and says, don't worry, I'm going to make you mother of a great nation. You're going to get through this. That's the message of this Bible over and over and over and over. And, it's not about the middleman. And like, no one's left out, no one's insignificant. So it is a radical Bible. All right, you've been very patient. We've been over an hour. I should stop now, but I want to thank you. Yitzhak Ben Yosef says, first time in human history, Jews and a compassionate God. Well, it does seem to be the first time. I mean, it's quite an innovation. If there are other religions that had something like this, the records haven't survived. So I think it's safe to say it was a real leap forward for humanity. Captain James West says, maybe teasing is mistaking me for the other Naomi, so I'll just skip right over that. Yitzhak Ben Yosef says, oh, that's interesting. Why America values second chances, rehabilitation. I would agree with you. That's fascinating. That's a great insight. I haven't pieced it together before, but it's a fantastic insight. I think that's right. And why Yamim Noraim every year. Also a fantastic insight. Thank you, Yitzhak Ben Yosef. Yamim Noraim means days of awe, and that's what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are called. And there's that word Nora, which isn't terrible in the modern sense, but awe-inspiring. And so these are 10 days. They start with Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, the new year. They end with the sunset on Yom Kippurim, which is the Day of Atonement. And in those 10 days, we say, I've explained this earlier, but we believe that the gates of heaven are open and God is literally inscribing us in the book of life or the book of death for the year ahead. And a lot depends on our serious reflection on our behavior over the last year. And again, this is different from other religions. Another reason Jews are the most annoying people. It's the most annoying religion. And I say that with respect, but you can't just say you're sorry and get out of there. You have to literally think about it for 10 days and fast on Yom Kippur. And you can't just say, I'm sorry to God. You're supposed to actually go to other human beings that you've wronged and make amends, atone. If you owe them money, you pay them back. If you hurt their feelings, you ask forgiveness. You have to actually be accountable for yourself, or else God is not impressed with you when the gates of heaven close and the plans for the year ahead have been made. I don't know if that literally happens, but it is a theme. It's awe-inspiring. As Yitzhak Ben Yosef says, it's the days of awe because our atonement as human beings, and I'm not saying this just for Jews, I think it's true. I think God is setting this out for everyone. How we account for ourselves is really important to God. And he's making that really, really, really clear. We've got to make it right if we've done wrong. D.A. Mon the Beach says, thanks so much, Dr. Wolf. I walk to your readings with much joy. By the way, your hair looks very elegant. Thank you, everyone. Lots of people told me that they found it distracting that I'm always pushing my hair out of my face. So I heard you and have tried to be accountable for that. Let's see. There is no Hilal. They were tripping. I'll skip that. The Shekhinah glory was on Moses's face, God's glory. Maybe so. And we'll talk about the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the feminine manifestation, filter, um, emanation of God, and uh, not a second God, but a kind of counterpart. Shekhinah is glory and also feminine. And I'll dive into that later. It's a later idea, but maybe so. And I'd love to know where you got that idea from. I mean, it's so intriguing. The text doesn't say what's making his face shine, but I will note religious traditions all over the world say the same thing, that when someone has an encounter with the divine or a vision of a sacred being, there's radiance. Or, people describe the Virgin Mary's apparitions being, in white robes that are like whiter than snow, whiter than white. I'm so interested by the whole Western tradition of like halos, and in some traditions, like halos surrounding the whole body, right? So this seems to be a real thing, that people experience radiance coming out of sacred beings, that is visible. These texts were edited over the years to fit the times as they absorbed other sects into the scheme. I mean, certainly that's likely. We know they were edited over time, but we're trying to get at some authentic core. And there's also evidence that these texts are very ancient. They weren't, they weren't invented or manifested, 1,500 years ago and then made to look older. they actually continue throughout various really historically accurate kingdoms and even personalities. Not everyone, but some people really did exist. I mean, if you go to Jerusalem now, there's David's Gate, and there's the basis of Solomon's Temple, and these are real people that we're going to meet very soon. Let's wrap up now. And Linda Warner Troyer says, God is a protective God in terms of wanting to protect his people. Well, I would agree with you. He keeps trying to do that. And I mean, honestly, it's like being a mom or dad and just wanting to protect a teenager who's self-destructive. And there's just only so much you can do. And they just, are going to drive while texting, or, God knows what. But God is clearly trying to protect his people. And there are real rules, because we really do live in a moral universe, and God's sharing them with us. And I don't think that's punitive. I think it's about keeping us blessed, into the third and fourth generation, if we take those to heart. All right, everyone, I'm going to go enjoy the rest of this beautiful evening. I do want to thank our sponsor, but I'll add a note. When we're done, we have a new sponsor, which is Native Path. And I want to thank them and TWC for being wonderful sponsors that allow us to do this work, get this out to you. So if you want to follow the Geneva Bible readings, go to Dr. Naomi Wolf Reads the Geneva Bible on Substack. If you can afford to, please become a paying subscriber. That allows us to let other people who can't afford to not being paying subscribers. It's free. There's no paywall. So that's how we do that. And support me on my Substack Outspoken, please, and support Daily Clout by becoming a member or a donor, because it takes a lot to get these videos edited, produced, distributed, hosted, and the independent journalism that we do over at Outspoken and at Daily Clout also is very resource intensive. We have to hire a lot of lawyers, because we are standing up against very powerful forces. So we do need your help. And if you're moved by anything we're doing here, please do support us. All right. Thank you all. I will try to do this more tomorrow. Take care. Have a wonderful night.